Welcome to the Doo Doo Divas Smells Like Money podcast. I'm your host, Suzan Chin Taylor, CEO and founder of Creative Raven, the firm that helps wastewater industry contractors and manufacturers unlock the power of digital marketing, AI, and PR to boost sales and opportunities. Whether it's through our online marketing and lead generation programs or providing a fully outsourced marketing department, we are passionate about helping businesses in the wastewater and civil infrastructure sectors not just survive, but thrive in today's digital world. Each episode, I'll be bringing you expert tips and strategies to help you grow and succeed. Let's dive in. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Doo Doo Divas Smells Like Money podcast. Today, we are continuing our conversation with Karen Valencic, the founder of Spiral Impact. And for those of you who may have missed out on last week's episode, I really invite you to tune in. But this is a segue into why good employees leave and what leaders are missing and what they can do about it. And so on our last episode, you said something very powerful, is that people don't necessarily leave a job because of the work or because of the pay. They leave because of
They
the
leave
people,
because of their people.
people.
And
I'd
particularly
really
their
like you
most
to
direct
unpack that.
person.
I'd
Yeah.
really like you to unpack that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it has to do mainly with the person that they report to, their most immediate boss. And it's really all about, to me, being visible and being valued so that you know that you're contributing. You know, I was checking into a hotel for a speaking engagement last year, and I showed up in the lobby, and there was a group of people in front of me that were there to, I think, work this meeting. And there was a young woman, and she was standing there talking to her fellow employees at her company, and she was really upset. And here's what I gathered from her. She was complaining about their boss, and she said, "Can you believe it that he told me what to do? He told me all of what I need to do. Doesn't he know that I know what to do?" And she was just going ranting on and on about the fact that she felt so dismissed because, he hired her for this project and he was telling her how to do it. Now, from his standpoint, he probably thought that was fine. I need to give this person some direction. And that is great. But as her boss, as her manager, he would have been more effective and probably gotten a better result and also not created all this bad juju on his team if he would have said to her, "No, I'm so excited that you're joining us. And I'd like to hear what your ideas are. What we want to accomplish is this. What do you suggest that we do? What do you think will be really important for this project?" Because now in the last episode, we talked about the door, and it's getting that mind working because she can then think of all her own ideas and then she can feel really good about herself. He can always add in, "I want to make sure we do this, this, and this too." And he gets what he wants, and he also gets to really elevate an employee. So people just don't get acknowledged enough in their work, that we all can, you can just see someone's posture just straighten up when they hear, "Hey, you really handled that really well." So
Yes,
managers, directors, whoever reports to you, really recognize them as they're coming to you. You hired them for a reason. So
right.
use that reason and recognize that the more you can engage them to contribute, the more involved they're going to be and the more likely they're going to stay there. I think all of your listeners can think of times, and when I work with teams and culture, I will often have them go through a thing where I have them reflect on a time where they worked with a group of people and it was a really enlivening, exciting experience.
Mm.
And, there was always that shared energy. They were engaged. And, I help groups actually create create a culture around that question is what brings you to life when you're on a team. And so leaders really need to know that information, ask that information, and continue that so that they know what's going on. Um, and
I
a lot
love
of
that
times,
because, that's one of the things I was going to ask you. And it was a perfect example of, that's a common behavior, I think, in managers that they feel that they need to tell the person what to do rather than share with that person, okay, here's what we're hoping the outcome of XYZ is, or here's what we need to accomplish for that client, or
right.
here's what we're being tasked to do. Is that now instead of ordering someone, you're sharing, gosh, we really need to make this happen.
Yeah.
What do you think we should do? And it's that involvement. Like, I'm not telling you how to get from point A to point B and all the little steps along the way. I'm just saying to you, we need to get from point A to point B. And I don't really care how you get us there, just get us there. And when you
Right.
empower, I really truly believe when you empower people that way, they want to stay. I was very blessed that I'm going to do a shout out to him, and he might listen. He listens to the show every once in a while. His name was Tom Schmant, and he was my first boss when I entered the wastewater industry. And Tom had a gift where he could see where someone's strengths were and where their weaknesses were. And
Uh-huh.
then he would channel them into where they were strong. But he
Yeah.
did not micromanage. He
Right.
shared what the objective was,
Yeah.
and then he went hands off and empowered you to do what you needed to do. And it's like, I hired you because I knew that you had the skills to do this. Now
Yeah.
just go do it. And I
Yeah.
think because he gave that autonomy to everyone on the team, from
Yeah.
the shipping clerk to the VP of sales,
Yeah.
Tom was one of those people that I truly believe that if he asked a staff member, I need you to walk through fire for me across
Yeah.
those hot coals, they wouldn't hesitate and say, sure, Tom, how long do you need me to do it?
Yeah.
And it's that approach with people that breeds that loyalty, which leads me to the next question, because you work with companies that are struggling, where they're losing people right and left. They bring you in, obviously, when they're having a problem. And it's like,
Yeah.
what are you seeing are some of the most common things that in organizations that are struggling to retain their best people, even when they pay well, their benefits are great, their hours are flexible? What are the things that are making them lose people? I call them those toxicities that are
Yeah.
occurring.
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head. It is a toxic environment. And a lot of times leaders don't know what that is. And I think it gets
Yes.
back to culture. It gets back to culture. And sometimes, it's the whole emperor has no clothes kind of thing. You have to be a
Yeah.
very astute leader to know really what's going on your team. And what I have found, and I have done this multiple times, is I'll be asked to come in, and people will say we have tried everything, and when we try to get this group together to kind of hash things out, they just start crying. I mean, I mean, now maybe engineers and wastewater may not do that, but in healthcare,
Oh,
and you've got a lot of sensitive people, but people just get so frustrated because again, their voices aren't heard.
yes.
Now, so I always ask the question, well, what have you done so far? And they always say the same thing. They say, well, we've gotten together and we try to hash it out, and it just makes it worse. Well, this brings
Mm,
to another concept in the spiral that I'll talk about more in terms of the totality of that in a little bit. But you have to think about intention. And when you try to solve a problem at the level of the problem, you only make the problem bigger. So what
ooh.
happens is is when I go in, oftentimes I will meet separately with the team members, depending on how big the team is and at what level it is and stuff. And it's always, I always go back to what is it that you're trying to accomplish here? What is it? And oftentimes we'll use the analogy as if you're riding a bicycle up a hill, or even if you're walking upstairs. Have you ever noticed how much easier it is when you look to the top of the hill instead of at your feet?
Yes.
And it's
Wow.
getting together to hash it out is like looking at your feet, trying to bike up a really big hill. It's
Hmm.
it's struggle, but and it's really magical. If you look at the top of the hill where you're going, it's much easier. So I had a group of people, and I can share this because it's been so long ago. I think everybody's probably retired at this point, but I worked with a group of in an OR area, and I'm sure you can relate to this. I had a lot of I was asked if I could come in and help. And it was between the sterile processing, and that's the department that sterilizes the equipment, and the OR. And they were having a lot of conflict. And they got to a point where they couldn't even talk to each other. And so they said, Karen, can you come in and help? And I said,
Wow.
sure. And then they said to me, okay, you have a half an hour at 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon, Good Friday.
Oh,
I thought
oh
it
yeah.
was
Why
really
don't we just
funny.
set ourselves
Oh,
up for as a biggest failure that we can, and we're
right.
going to be
But
receptive.
I'm always up to a challenge. And so that's when I thought about, I couldn't do everything I'd like to do, but everybody gathered in the room. And I will use this as an example too. When you have people that are on two sides of an issue, you can bet money, you can take it to the bank that if you've got a table and they're going to sit at the table, they will line up on their side. They will always do that. And so actually when I work with groups, if I can, and I can't always, but I always try to get them facing the same direction because when they're looking at each other, there's this inherent conflict that's happening. And then what I did is I asked them about if they'd ridden a bike up a hill, and I asked them to consider what was at the top of their hill. And I went around and I asked each of them, and I wrote it down on a whiteboard and
Right.
I recorded it. And they each got to share what was at the top of their hill. And guess what? They all wanted the same thing. And so that began a conversation that we
Right.
talked about. How do we get there? So, and it just shifted everything. And a lot of times people will say, well, that's so obvious. And it's like, well, if it was so obvious, then why weren't they doing it? No.
Yeah,
So,
well, yeah, it's because you can't. I think sometimes you're too close to it. And that,
uh-huh.
that comes to when we think about that cost of the unspoken
Yes.
conflict inside of a team. And,
Oh,
even in our personal lives, sometimes, we're coming at an issue from two different perspectives. And because we're so married to it, we can be very close to that person, but we can't hear each other.
right. Right. And it's rarely about the issue that comes up.
Yes,
It's
yes,
rarely
it's
about
about
that.
something else
That
underneath the surface.
that we haven't discussed, that we haven't
Right.
discussed. So that's the thing. The other thing, oh, I'm sorry, I just hit my table here.
It's
The
okay.
other thing I wanted to mention about what leaders can do, what teams can do, and something I find really instrumental and it's really about culture building. And you got to know that on your team, most often, unless you've been really very deliberate. The culture of your team will be the strongest personality, bad or good. And I use the analogy of I'm in the Midwest, and here we have beautiful trees. We can have a forest. But what happens is honeysuckle gets in there and it starts choking out things. And I liken the honeysuckle to team culture. And what happens is it can overrun. And you have all these beautiful specimens of trees that have their own uniqueness and they contribute to that forest in their own unique way. But when that honeysuckle, or if you're in the south, it's kudzu, and it just snuffs out everything. And so I look at team development as actually cutting back that honeysuckle. And I do
Mm,
that through really having some real conversations, facilitating some really value-based conversations with that team. And it's a fabulous process to be able to do that and have people listen to each other and share things that they haven't probably shared before. And then through that, what I end up having them do is they create a what I call as a team credo. Now, what's different how I do it than how a lot of people do it is this is about how are you going to engage with each other? They're yes and no questions.
mm.
And so there's not we respect each other. It's is do you respect me? Do you have my back? And every group I've done this with is it's a different set of questions, and it needs to be a short list of questions. It can't be more than seven, and seven's probably too many. But going through that process and defining the culture is a very powerful thing. And honestly, when I do it with leaders, I tell them, I said, sometimes when you start to do this, people will say, I'm not going to do this. And they'll leave, they'll bail. And that's a good thing because sometimes there's people there that do not want to be held accountable for their behavior. And when you start defining what that is as a group, that that really tells people whether they're a fit there or not. And that is a really powerful exercise. And oftentimes they'll put I've had groups that have had them beautifully written out on the wall. And so what do they do with that? It provides them with a talking point. So if things go south, you can
Right.
say, we agreed to this. And right now I'm not feeling I can say yes to that. And I started doing that when I read about Lou Holtz, who was a famous football coach. He recently passed away, by the way, may he rest in peace. But he had three questions he would always ask his football players to do. Those three questions were, can I trust you? Wait, let's see. What were they? Let me see. Can I trust you? Are you committed to excellence? And do you care about me? Those were his three questions. And
Oh,
he told his players they'd pause, and before they'd go out on the field, they would check in on those three questions and say, is everybody good? Are there any no's? And then you could have a conversation. So you clear out that unsaid stuff and you can move on forward.
right. Especially if
So,
someone within the team is having what we'd call a charge, quote unquote, with
right,
someone else to either
right.
air it privately or, if they're having a charge group wise to just, I'm feeling uncomfortable with this. I think it
Yeah,
all comes down to a leader being able to create safe space
yeah,
for
it is.
those that report to
Hmm.
them. And so, in closing, this is might be a really loaded question because our next episode we are going to really talk about, we are in an industry, you've worked in hospitals, but we're going to talk about wastewater because these are both industries where safety
Yeah,
and the public welfare, health of people is absolutely critical. There's no shortcuts. You can't go
right.
rogue. You have to follow certain procedures.
Yeah,
And, we're going to be talking about how you balance those strict procedures of what you do with that human communication and why it is so important as a leader to not skip over the why we do
right.
things in a fast paced or technical environment. And so we're going to be
Absolutely.
talking about that in our next episode of human skills in a technical world. But before we close on this episode, if there is a leader who's listening that has been struggling with turnover right now,
Hmm.
very quickly, what are some of the initial things that they should look at? Not necessarily in their team, here's the caveat,
Uh-huh.
but within themselves that may need to be fixed as the starting point.
Yeah. I'd like to just this may take more than 30 seconds to explain, but I like my work I call spiral impact. And I call that in the first episode, we talked about how
Right.
power is rotational, true power is. And I think a lot of times leaders need to think, how are they leading with power, with true power or with force? And I just want to
Yes.
kind of give you kind of just a quick thing. When you think about a spiral, we've talked a lot about asking questions, acknowledging. That's the rotational part of that spiral.
Right.
There's also the middle. It's the eye of the storm. And you think
Mm,
about a hurricane or a tornado, they talk about how defined and how the pressure, what the pressure is in the middle of that. And that really defines how much power there is. And how does that relate to leaders? And that is the idea of being centered and present with yourself. And that's something I work with leaders on a lot, because if you're not present with yourself, you're not going to be aware of what's going on around you. And so that's a really important skill for leaders to be able to be silent, be able to be present and observe. And that really improves your intuition about what's going on. So it's a thing I work with people on in a variety of different ways. But that's something to think about. And then the other thing that's really important, and again, if I'm only going in a circle and asking questions, and if I'm only centered, that's a circle. It's not a spiral. There's that third element, which is directional, which is
mm,
intention. And that intention is so critically important. And again, a lot of times we leave out intention. And for leaders out there, I would say, think through your intention with your people, with whatever it is that you are creating as a group. What is the intention around it? And I think of intention in three different categories. The intention is there's a bigger picture of, what is it, are you putting in a new system in a city? What are you doing ultimately? But there's also the deeper purpose-based intention in terms of you as a leader. How do you define yourself as a leader? Are you a servant leader? Are you a leader that really wants to bring up their people? Are you a conscious capitalist? That's a thing I've been involved with lately. And then the third level is how are you going to respond? What is going on right now? And so a lot of times we dive in without thinking through our intention. And so if I'm having a conversation with one of my people, I want to precede that by saying, I'd really love to understand how you're seeing this right now and what I can do
mm.
to make this easier or better, or what is it that you need? That gets to be back to intention. So there's three things. It's going around, looking at it from all angles. It's being really centered, and then it's that intention, which is the direction. And I think a really great leader has a grasp on all of those things.
Well, Karen, thank you so much. I think that
Yeah.
that's a perfect place to leave this episode. And for those of you who have been
Okay.
listening that want to learn more about what Karen does, I invite you to visit her website, which is spiralimpact.com. She
Yeah.
also publishes a lot of content on LinkedIn. And what was the other place that you say you publish?
Substack.
Right.
Substack. But if
And
you
she
go to
has a
my
book called
website,
Spiral Impact too, that is, I'm sure, available on most booksellers or Amazon.
absolutely. Here's the
That
book.
up for us there for we're
It
seeing
is.
on
It's the
screen
Black Belt
now,
edition.
and the
Yep.
Black Belt edition. Well, I am
Uh-huh.
really looking forward to our final installment where we are going to be talking about how all these things that we've been talking about in the last two episodes can really be applied to our technical world of the wastewater industry.
Yes.
And so, listeners, thank you for tuning in. And Karen, thank you for sharing your wisdom. And until next time, keep it flowing. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. If you're ready to take your marketing to the next level and start increasing sales and opportunities for your business, reach out to us at Creative Raven. We're here to help you thrive in the digital landscape. Visit creativeraven.com or click the link in the show notes below to schedule a call and learn how we can support your growth. If you enjoyed the insights on today's episode, be sure to hit subscribe so you'll never miss an update. Until next time, keep growing and keep it flowing.